Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Graditam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Vritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Amba Tvamanusandadami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravindayata Patra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vektraikapanaye Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you all for joining us again. We are in chapter 16, and from verse 6, Lord Krishna has been explaining what the demonic nature looks like by using demonic people as an example. Only talking about qualities is really not enough for us to contemplate upon. We need to hear how those negative qualities play out in a person's life in order to understand why they are so harmful to others and our own self. And you might have noticed that Krishna didn't talk about people when he explained about the divine nature. He just talked about those qualities in an abstract way. Perhaps he did so because if he had explained what it looks like in practice, we may end up with making a superficial attempt of copying the actions instead of focusing on cultivating the actual inner virtue. You may have seen people, they wear the same sari as Amma, they might even look like her a little bit, the same height, same face kind of, and people think, oh wow, it's Amma. And then they think, oh yeah, people think I'm Amma because I'm wearing all that. But that's the easiest thing to do. The most difficult thing is to actually have any kind of qualities that are close to Amma. That is so difficult for anybody. So that is the challenge. But when it comes to demonic qualities, we are all too familiar with both external and internal forms, what it looks like externally and what it feels like internally. So we need to focus on the fallout of our actions, because then we will be much more motivated to discard and uproot the negativities from our mind, because we see how many people are hurt by that. But someone who has a really demonic character will find it hard to change themselves because they don't accept the injunctions of any scriptures or the words of a realized being. And once we cut off those connections, forget about moksha, liberation. We can't even learn the difference between right and wrong, or how karma or reincarnation work. They will simply live according to their vasanas, hearing what they want to hear. Amma told a story about an elderly man who went to see his doctor, and the doctor examined him. The old man was saying, I'm having a lot of health problems. And the doctor examined him and said, this is serious. I'm going to tell you, what to do. And he gave him a regimen and sent him home. The very next day, the doctor saw that old man walking down the street looking really dapper, and he had a young woman on his arm, hanging onto his arm, and the doctor was shocked. I just told him to, take care of his health. And he says to the man, "Hey, what are you doing?" And the old man said, "I'm just following what you said. And we're going to the nearby restaurant to have a sumptuous meal." And the doctor was baffled. He said, "What do you mean, my instructions?" And then the man said, "Yeah, I'm just doing whatever you said to do. Be cheerful and get a hot mama." And the doctors were like, "No, that's not it. I said, be careful, you have a heart murmur." But he wanted to hear hot mama, so that he took it in that way. So the vasanas determine what we hear and what we think about, right? So we should remember that there is a price for all these things. In the Katha Upanishad, the god of death is the guru. And he says, the means of attaining the other world is not revealed to the one who does not discriminate, who is deluded by wealth and has become negligent. He who thinks this world is all there is comes under my sway again and again. So such people, completely deluded in their pursuit of wealth, they think this world is all that exists. And as a result, they come under the sway of Lord Yama, the god of death, and it means they're going to be dying and being reborn over and over again. He also, Lord of Death also says, they consider themselves intelligent and enlightened, though living in the midst of ignorance. So actually they are steeped in ignorance, but they never realize it. They consider themselves to be intelligent and highly learned. They say, "I know what is right and wrong. Why are you telling me this? Why should I listen to you? Why should I read the scriptures for that matter? Or why should I go meet Amma? I don't care. I already know everything." So this kind of arrogant attitude will not diminish until they get a lot of life experiences, painful life experiences. So it all goes to show that mere philosophy is not enough. It's better to be a practitioner with limited understanding than to be an armchair philosopher. That way, at least some kind of right conduct will keep us from falling from the path of dharma. We have 5 verses today, unusually, because a lot of it is sort of self-explanatory, but we'll move right into verse 8. Asatyam apratishtam te jagadahur anishwaram aparaspara sambhutam kimanyat kama haitukam. Now slowly together. Asatyam apratishtam te jagadahur anishwaram aparaspara sambhutam kimanyat kama haitukam. I took a number of liberties this time around, probably a lot of changes in the verses, just to make it a little more intelligible. They say, in this world there is no truth, no moral foundation, no God. It has been brought about by mutual union with karma as its cause, nothing else. Now I have to explain what karma is. So So kama is going to come up many times in this section of the chapter. And a lot of Westerners, the only thing they know about kama is something like Kama Sutras or something like that. So it sounds like lust or whatever. But we should understand that these English renditions, I've said it many times, they're basically Victorian English from the 19th century, sometimes early 19th century. And it's stuck. And it's just been carried on into the modern day. And in the early 1800s, lust did not mean necessarily carnal pleasure or the yearning for, sexual enjoyment. It meant more like a uncontrollable desire, very powerful desire that overwhelms you, it consumes you. Of course, the sexual version of that fits in that category, but just by saying kama doesn't necessarily mean the modern version of lust. As far as I know, in the modern days, this lust is basically only about sex. So if we can broaden that and say that it's lust for everything that you want, lust for money, lust for that. I mean, we have an expression like that. But when you hear it in the context here, there's a tendency for us to jump to the extreme version of it. So I'm going to use kama and occasionally lust also today, but I want you to just remember that it's not limited only to the sexual version of it. So Shankaracharya has something to say. Everybody's got a lot to say today, so you can look forward to a lot of commentary. He says, these demonic ones say, since we are unreal, this whole universe is unreal. Wow, wonderful philosophy, right? There's no basis in right and wrong, no dharma, no adharma. There's no God ruling the universe according to right and wrong either. The whole universe simply comes from the union of man and woman. That counts for worms and everything, right? Even bacteria, maybe, I don't know. And it's all under the impulse of kama. What else could possibly be the cause of the universe? And there's also no such thing as karma. So they don't even believe in the theory of action and reaction, which is even a physical law. Newton's third law of motion, I believe it's called. It's just the spiritual version of that. That's what karma is. But they abandon that idea as well. In other words, they're basically wanton materialists. And even though we know from the Gita, which we believe is 5,300 years ago, we know that there must have been materialists, wanton materialists, even 5,300 years ago. And though many academics would say that the Bhagavad Gita is not that old, they would still have to recognize the existence of a deliberately hedonistic way of life over 4,000 years ago. We're not talking about Neanderthals, we're talking about so-called civilized people, but they actually embraced hedonism. So this means that our modern day culture is anything but modern. A culture focused on material pleasures like we have now is just a rerun of various forms of hedonism, which was even regarded by the Greeks as one school of philosophy. Hedonism was a school of philosophy. And they even had moral hedonism, which is that you should engage in hedonism because that's the only thing worth doing in life. So India has its own name for this theory, or this so-called philosophy, and that is Charvaka. There is the Charvaka school of philosophy. And this has been, even academically traced to 2,500 years ago. So there's nothing new about our society. Don't kid yourself. And Jnanadev's commentary is so fabulous. He first shares his viewpoint on the matter, and then he takes the position of these Charvakas, these hedonists, and saying this is how they think. So first, his viewpoint. The world exists from time immemorial, while God is its ruling king. And the Vedas are the supreme court that decide what is right or wrong. Because in those days, the only source of right and wrong was the Vedas, which of course was a great source. But at the same time, there weren't any separate laws per se. They, from time to time, what we call Dharma Shastra would be updated, just like they update the ordinances in the modern day, or present day, I should say. They would update the application of those injunctions that come in the Vedas, but nothing that is not in the Vedas, basically. And he continues, those who are found guilty, according to the Vedas, have to suffer the penalty of a hellish life, while those found to be just receive a heaven to live in happily. It is such a universal government existing throughout eternity that demonic people call false and vain. In other words, they casually dismiss these things that have been understood for millenniums. Then Jnanadev proceeds to describe what the Charvakas typically say, and I'll tell you, it feels like an eerie 700-year-old prophecy of what our present-day culture looks like now. He says, they further say that foolish people are deceived by the ritual offerings. Those who are crazy for God are being cheated into idol worship, while yogis, clad in orange-colored garments, get confused by the delusion of ecstasy. In other words, they say that the concentrated meditation of a yogi is just a delusion, even though they're the ones who are deluded, but we'll get to that. Thus, whatever can be acquired through one's own strength should be enjoyed shamelessly, since there is no greater good in the world than that. It is a shame, a misfortune to become irritated simply because one cannot acquire sense enjoyment for lack of physical strength. Even though people may think it is a sin to kill the rich, it is surely the fruit of their merit that the strong can acquire everything the rich possess by stealing it from them, basically. If it is bad for the strong to devour the weak, then why aren't the weak fish totally annihilated since the strong fish devour them? Young couples are wedded on auspicious occasions after confirming the respectability of the families on both sides, with the object of having babies. Meanwhile, innumerable births take place between animals, birds, and other classes of beings, and which one of them gets married according to the scriptures? None, right? What's the point? Do the riches acquired by theft ever prove poisonous to anyone? It is said that there is God who rules over all and makes all beings experience the fruit of all their actions, but really speaking, we cannot see the next world or God. Therefore, the theory has no basis in reality. This is the main source of information for these materialists. It has to be tangible. They won't accept anything that they can't see with their eyes or their senses. A worm remains pleased in excreta as much as Indra, the king of gods, as much as Indra does in the heavens in the company of Urvashi. That's his divine consort. Therefore, heaven and hell are not a reward or punishment, since lust is equally satisfied in both cases. Makes a lot of sense, right? And Sri Ramakrishna Devan says, that's Swami Vivekananda's guru, a worldly person can be easily identified by their dislike for spirituality and religion. They object to chanting or singing bhajans and prevent others from taking the spiritual path. They openly ridicule genuine Mahatmas and ashrams. Wow. Well, you may know somebody like that. But the most important part of this verse is that they say there's no truth, there's no moral foundation, and there's no God. It's pretty big statements. But the actual word they use in Sanskrit is asatyam. And when you're talking in the context of Vedanta, asatyam usually means it's not real. And the definition of real is something that it remains the same in the past, present, and future, which we cannot say about our bodies, our feelings, or anything. The only thing that remains the same past, present, and future is our consciousness, the feeling I. So this is not an argument on that level, because these are materialists. They're atheists, basically. So they don't care about Vedanta philosophy. So Shankaracharya clarifies in his commentary, saying that such people are speaking untruth. That's what they are saying. Their demonic nature makes them tell lies, and they begin to look at the whole world in the same way as they look at themselves. They think everyone else is also lying about everything. In other words, they are rejecting the idea that people are real. Like you'll say, oh, that guy's not real. This person's a real guy or a woman, you know. So they're rejecting that there can possibly be a real human being. They're all corrupt. It's not that their point is that the entire world is unreal, because they're chasing after all those pleasures, and they say this is the only thing that does exist, the world. What they're doing really is projecting their own untruthfulness on the world of people. Here's a little story that can show us how that can sometimes play out. During an exam, a boy asked the teacher if he could take his water bottle out of his backpack. The teacher gave him permission, but the boy had a cheat sheet hidden on the bottom of his water bottle. And he was looking at the cheat sheet. The teacher snuck up behind him and grabbed his test paper, saying, "Now you're going to get a fail because you cheated." And the boy was so shocked because he was so careful. And it was such a tiny piece of paper. How did he know? And so he just got up his courage and he said to the teacher, "How did you know that I had a cheat sheet on the bottom of my water bottle?" The teacher scoffed and said, "You fool. How do you think I passed this exam?" Right? So this is the kind of thought process that these Charvakas, it's part of their philosophy. Before somebody swindles you, you have to learn how to swindle them. That's their life motto. So, but for us, it's a good lesson. We have to remember that when we doubt someone else's honesty or truthfulness, it's kind of a reflection of our own self-image. Like, we know that we understand dishonesty and untruthfulness, so we kind of think, is he trying to do to me what I do to other people? There's a little bit of that in us too. Other commentators have yet another explanation for this word, asatyam. Satyam means true or truth, and asatyam just means the opposite. So they say that that word asatyam is a rejection of all moral truth, which is something that they also believe in, rejecting all morality. Especially they want to reject anything in the Vedas, because if they don't reject the truth of the Vedas, then they cannot justify all their wrongdoings. They find it simple enough to just say, I don't believe in the Vedas, therefore I don't have to follow them. That's okay until you realize that there is a next birth, and then you're in trouble. But in the context of the Gita, not believing in the Vedas was equal to being an atheist, because that's all there was, at least in the Indian context. So the present-day version of such a statement would be a rejection of all sources of religious, spiritual, and moral teachings. If you reject the Vedas, that's what it was equivalent to. And once the concepts of dharma and adharma are discarded as blind belief, the basic fiber of society collapses. There's no common foundation upon which humanity can stand. And once dharma is gone, the law of karma goes out the window also. Not in reality, but out of the person's mind. So you can just imagine what kind of a life they lead. They'll never accept the idea of a supreme being ruling over this universe, because if they do, they have to recognize at least some kind of religious or moral teachings. Now, when we look at today's world, which is in a similar condition, we can imagine that the younger generation is definitely, especially at risk of rejecting the notion of God, because it looks like bad deeds are rewarded, not good deeds. And I think we've all felt like that at one time or another. Why do bad people get good things, etc.? And we get discouraged. Fortunately, somebody proposed that question to Amma, and Amma answered, so I'll share that with you. The question was, sometimes a true seeker undergoes a lot of hardship and difficulties. Why does that happen? Amma said, when a true seeker or a devotee passes through a painful process of purification, which is really the exhaustion of their vasanas, a non-believer or a skeptic may use this as an example or as proof that God doesn't exist. They will say, if God exists, why does he allow people to suffer like this? You tell me, isn't he supposed to be compassionate? What would you respond? See, we have to know what we're talking about. Otherwise, they may convince us instead of the other way around. A lot of people lose their faith because they just don't understand the deeper principles. So what Amma says is that the sufferings and problems that you may witness in life are actually accelerating the process of purification. In the case of a sincere seeker, he's only interested in liberation and cutting all worldly ties and dependencies, and he wants to cultivate an attitude of self-surrender, because that's what makes it happen. A real seeker is trying to dissolve his mind and go beyond the intellect and body. And Amma says, only a person who has been in jail for a long time can enjoy the bliss of freedom. Similarly, only a seeker who has undergone a guru's disciplining is able to experience the freedom of realization. So we are so blessed to have Amma in our lives, because she wipes away all of our confusion. That question, if the person didn't get the answer to it, he might have just lost his way on the path. And Amma sometimes talks about these things from the standpoint of karma too. Due to past life karma, bad things can happen to good people and good things can happen to bad people. We cannot control that. We don't know what their past life karma is. But one who accepts the law of karma in his or her life, they will understand that once our good karma is depleted, sooner or later we will have to experience the karma of our bad deeds, because there's no such thing as having only good karma. There's always going to be selfishness mixed in somewhere. A good example is somebody like Bernie Madoff, if you remember him. He was the one who developed the largest Ponzi scheme in history, defrauding thousands of investors for billions of dollars over a period of at least 17 years. So 17 years he was flying high, he could just have anything he wanted, billions of dollars, right? But his bad time came, his bad karma came. Once all that was, his good karma was over, all it took was a recession to expose his deception, and he was sentenced to federal prison for a mere 150 years. And he died in jail. So he got what he deserved, maybe. Maybe he's going to do that many more times, who knows. Now, one may ask, if there's no God, then how did the universe come into being? This is the question that they didn't really answer properly in the theory of how the world would come into existence. That's one of the problems with their theory, but the materialist would just reply simplistically, God is not needed. We don't need God because it's the law of nature. Reproduction between male and female, and who needs a God for that? It's just a natural instinct, and beings don't need the Vedas to procreate. We're just programmed by our desires. That's it. So, with logic like this, you can just kind of visualize the type of life they lead. Without any interest in dharma or moksha, their entire life is dedicated to just getting the basic essentials, and then after that, everything is for enjoyment. And now in the following verses, Krishna is going to explain just how dangerous these people are to society. So we'll move on to verse 9. Etam drishtim avashtabhya nashtatmanolpa buddhayah prabhavantyugra karmanaha shayaya jagato hitaha. This is one verse that's hard to divide and pronounce in pieces. It'll be easier when we chant it together. Etam drishtim avashtabhya nashtatmanolpa buddhayah prabhavantugra karmanaha kshayaya jagato hitaha. Clinging to this view, these lost souls of small intellect and fierce deeds rise as the enemies of humanity for its destruction. I changed the thing, so I'll read it one more time. Clinging to this view, these lost souls of small intellect and fierce deeds rise up as the enemies of humanity for its destruction. Some of the changes that I choose are just to make it gender neutral. Others are more just to make it more easier to follow. Shankaracharya's commentary, he says lost souls means they have lost all chances of any spiritual advancement. So once you reject all these things that we talked about in the last verse, there's absolutely no hope for spiritual growth. So from the spiritual standpoint, they're lost. That human birth was lost. Their intellect is small because, he says, it concerns itself only with sense objects. So many profound and lofty concepts can be pondered or contemplated, and we can look at the far stars and even write philosophy and poetry, all these things. No, not interested in any of that. They just want sense pleasures. And fierce deeds means they are intent on hurting others, injuring others. That's why they're called fierce deeds. Jnanadev says, they feel disgust for God. Wow. And indulge only in vain talk. I mean, you can understand not believing in God, but disgust? Why do you have to be disgusted with God? They have no firm purpose in life. On the contrary, they openly espouse and practice nihilism, which basically is a kind of anarchy. There's many meanings, but here it's kind of anarchy, I think. Firmly planting the doctrine of atheism in their heart. When the water in a pond dries up, fishermen gather around that last deep spot as the fish face certain death. All diseases raise their heads in the human body at its approaching fall. A comet ascends over the horizon, portending evil to the world. In such ways, demonic people take birth to instigate the destruction of creatures in the world. Their very birth is like a curse for the world. Now, this is a very extreme statement. We're not really looking for the worst of the worst. We're looking for it in ourselves. So we'll get to that. Another somewhat modern commentary says, the intellect dwindles away as one becomes a slave to the senses. This is what Amma says also. Inordinate sense indulgence ends in adharma and self-annihilation, as we're going to see soon. Their vicious actions contaminate the world and cause immeasurable harm. Still, they have more negative purposes to serve. After all the bad things they do, they're not finished. They have more to donate to the peaceful world. So this is the life philosophy of demonic people. It's based on their beliefs, which came in the previous mantra, previous verse. So they have no chance of spiritual growth. That means they don't even need a human body. The only reason why they got a human body was probably they did one or two good things in their last life, and so God blessed them with another chance. Okay, let's see if you can do something good with this human body. But if their existence is based solely on desire gratification, they really don't need that body next time around, and they probably won't get one. So like Amma says, even a worm sleeps, eats, and procreates in the feces. So what more are we doing to make our lives worthy of a human birth? Next time we will get a different body, and what we get is going to be based on our lifestyle this time. So anyone who cannot read that writing on the wall, he calls them small intellect. It's so obvious. It's just, cause and effect. But they don't have any discernment, so they can't see that. They choose temporary comfort over lasting happiness. What could be more foolish than that? In the quest for finite pleasures, they lose the infinite. It's like, would you like the infinite or the finite? Maybe I'll take the finite. That's good for me. So that's the problem. They don't even have the discernment to choose the right thing. In the Katha Upanishad, again, we have another teaching from the Lord of Death. The preferable and the pleasurable are different. That itself is a huge statement. These two, serving different purposes, blind humanity. So true, right? All of us. Good accrues to one who chooses the preferable. One who chooses the pleasurable falls from the path. Not immediately. It takes some time, just a bit. Depends on how much you were already on the right path. So what he's emphasizing here in this verse is that everything depends on how we use our discernment, our discrimination, and our free will. I mean, they go together. So this guru, Lord Yama, he says, discerning people choose Shreyas, which is the highest good. And he says that is the spiritual goal also. So we may not earn as much as others do. We may have a smaller house. We may have an old car that's not so great. But these are all deliberate choices. It's not a sign of failure. Sometimes people get upset with their life. Oh, I'm doing spirituality, but I don't have anything special. I have a small room and all this kind of stuff. You chose this. Don't forget that. And remind your own mind that you weren't happy when you had a lot more. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. So, you have to remind the mind over and over. Krishna also says that they take to cruel actions, right? Why do they do that? Because in chapter 3, he says in verse 37, it is desire. It is anger, born of rajo guna, which is rajas, all-consuming and most evil. Know this to be the enemy here on earth. Actually, it's enough to have it be an enemy to ourselves, but even then we douse everybody with that negativity and even create more problems. If we have a pure desire to serve our guru or society, that is a desire that can be fulfilled. But material desires are never truly satisfied. They give only temporary satisfaction, with the side effect of wanting more and more to feel satisfied. That is why people resort to illegitimate methods like Bernie Madoff, because their present means are not enough to satisfy their desires. It doesn't matter how wealthy they are, as these two examples will show you. Even though Michael Jackson had a fortune of $500 million at the time of his death, you know how much his debt was? About the same amount. Because he had a habit of overspending throughout his career. And then everybody probably knows someone, maybe he's infamous, but Mike Tyson, he was the heavyweight champion before. And he had an illustrious career for his line of work. And he was paid an average of $20 million per year for over 20 years. And that's just the salary and everything. Think about all this commercials and all that. What happened? At the end of his career, he was fined. He lost his boxing license for misbehavior in the ring. And 6 years later, he was bankrupt. In fact, he owed $23 million. What happened to all that money? Well, it turned out that he spent $400,000 per month to maintain his lifestyle. And he also spent 3 years in prison for a rape conviction, and he was convicted multiple times for drugs because he was a cocaine addict. So you can have as much money as you want, but these desires are so powerful. If you allow yourself to, if you give yourself over to the desires, they will eat you alive, make you do all kinds of bad things that's going to get you in trouble. Just like this guy. He was a tough guy, but no. The law of karma doesn't care that you're a tough guy. So kama, that unbridled desire, gives rise to anger, and anger gives rise to harmful actions. Now we have so many such people today. We can really understand what Krishna means when he says that they rise as the enemies of humanity for its destruction. We're seeing that taking place right now in a far away land. And just when you look at the news, you'll just remember Lord Krishna's words. Such people become the cause of destruction for the whole world. But it's the sad thing is that God has given enough for everybody to live comfortably. We have fertile soil, water, everybody, the sunshine for everybody, oxygen. We never pay anything for oxygen. And believe it or not, there's enough space for everybody. In fact, if you take the population on the planet right now, which is about 8 billion people, a huge number, and you divide all the land equally between those 8 billion people, how much space do you think you will get? We think it's so crowded, there's no space, you know. Over 4 acres per person. Divvy it up. Let's see if they're ready to work and farm and grow things and then live off the land. People just don't want to do that. That's why they cluster in big cities. But when their desires go unchecked, naturally, other people will be deprived of their share. Like even now, the US has a little over 4% of the world's populations, and it has 30% of the world's wealth. With that being the present situation, just imagine if the world, what the world would look like if demonic people increased. The selfishness in their heart makes their very existence harmful to all beings. But to be fair, it doesn't mean that we should get angry with such people. That's not the point. The point is that if we want to avoid becoming an enemy to all beings, we have to make sincere efforts to remove those demonic tendencies within us. We all have anger, we all have desires. Sometimes we get consumed by them also. We have fear, we have so many other negative qualities that he's already talked about. So we should focus on those if we don't want to become like these demonic people. Because it's just a question of degree. It's not a question of either or. We have those tendencies. That's what we have to look at. And Jnanadev says here, now hear, O Partha, what thoughtless and confused enthusiasm with which they felicitate themselves on performing such acts. So they do terrible things and then they feel that they're great for it. So let's hear that in verse 10. Kamam asritya dushpuram dambha mana madanvitaha mohad kritva sadgrahan pravartante shuchivrataha. Another tough one to cut into pieces. We'll chant together slowly. Kamam asritya dushpuram dambha manamadanvitaha mohad gritva sadgrahan pravartante shuchi vrataha. Remember, this is Romanized Sanskrit, and if you can't understand how to read these, what we call diacritical marks, there is a legend, I think, at the beginning of this Gita. One second, I'm just going to double check. Or maybe it's at the end, and if it's not, it's in the bhajan books. Yeah, they didn't put it in the Bhagavad Gita itself. But in almost all of our bhajan books, you'll find it. And it really helps you to pronounce properly because it is based on a scholarly or like the academic standard. And you just follow that and you can pronounce it properly. So I didn't change anything about this. Cherishing insatiable desires and holding evil ideas through delusion, they work with impure resolve, full of hypocrisy, pride, and arrogance. I think you got that. The commentary continues from Shankaracharya. They have peculiar wishes that are hard to fulfill. They take improper resolves. They make unwholesome decisions through delusion, lack of judgment. They set about their work in the world with unholy determination and wicked resolve. So it doesn't mean that they're weak. They have so many like bad ideas and bad judgment that they put all their tremendous energy in those directions. And Jnanadev says, a net cannot be filled with water, nor can firewood ever be sufficient to satisfy a fire. Similarly, amongst objects with an insatiable appetite, kama, or desire, deserves first rank, first place. Demonic people always harbor kama, not karma, kama in their heart, and gather around them a group of hypocrites and egotists. So if there is some megalomaniac, you'll see they're surrounded by hypocrites and egotists. That's the general rule. And then he uses a natural example, which is really vivid, because if you're familiar, if you're from India, or another tropical country, but if not, there's a time of year, just like any animal, where there's the mating season and then there's a lot of fighting going on, between the male species. So that mating season happens for elephants also. And when they are ready to mate, they say in India that the elephant is in rut. And they'll do anything to get that female elephant, like tear down everything. They're crazy. So he says, an elephant already in mating season gets even more wild if given an alcoholic drink. In that way, the demonic ones get stiffer with pride as they get old. Imagine getting a elephant in rut getting drunk. I don't want to see that. Already perverse, if folly is added on top of that, there is no limit to their stubbornness. From birth, they are adept in acts that can trouble to others and crush their lives. Maybe from birth they embezzle milk from their mother's breasts and sell it on the black market or something like that. Is a baby already doing bad things. They proclaim their exploits and look down on people with contempt. They further spread out the net of their desires in all directions. In short, they go on increasing their bad deeds in these ways, just as a stray cow goes on eating up everything that comes in its way. So, these are the two basic characteristics: unbridled desire and anger, because they're two sides of the same coin. And this is actually coming from a concept that we talked about a long time ago. I don't expect you to remember it. The 6 enemies. Shadripu. Starts with desire, then anger, and there's 4 more. We'll get to those in a moment. But in chapter 3, Krishna focused on desire and anger. And now he's adding greed, arrogance, and delusion, which are lobha, mada, moha. So it's kama, krodha, lobha, mada, moha, matsara. The 6th one doesn't come up here yet. So he's added these 3, greed, arrogance, and delusion. So we have 5 of the 6 enemies. But it is the first 3, desire, anger, and greed. These form the foundation of the fortress where the six enemies set up camp and blockade the road to liberation. That's what they do. They're like the thieves waiting to rob people on the highway to liberation. It all starts with unbridled desires, but there are techniques that help us segregate the morass of desires in the mind. First of all, we should understand that there are various types of desires depending on their goal. There are innocent and harmless desires. There are selfish desires, desires that bring harm to oneself, desires that bring harm to others, and then there are desires that bring harm to everyone. So Krishna is he says evil ideas, so we can understand that these are harmful desires that he's talking about. In addition, obviously we don't want to engage in any of those harmful ones. We want to stick with the innocent ones, like having a pet or something, or wanting to have a garden and grow flowers. I mean, you're not hurting anybody by that. You're doing some good, actually. And then we can also categorize desires based on how feasible they are, because the less feasible ones are just going to make us frustrated. So movie stars and famous athletes are often the object of youthful infatuation and fantasies, right? But every high school girl or boy is infatuated with some star or another, right? So what is the likelihood that their infatuation will ever be fulfilled? 0. That's why Krishna says specifically that such desires are never going to be fulfilled. The mind really tries hard to convince us that it just might happen, but it never does. And even if by some wild chance our desire is fulfilled, some bizarre, desire is fulfilled, the satisfaction doesn't last long. There's Miss America, Miss Universe. They get married and with somebody else who's maybe Mr. America, Mr. Universe, and then they get divorced. They're sick of each other. So how long does it last? The mind just sets its sights on the next thing. Maybe this, maybe that. It's like trying to reach the horizon in a rowboat. You get exhausted, but you never reach it. Another problem is that we don't truly understand the object of our desire, whether it's a person, some kind of status, luxuries, money, whatever it is. We make it into something that it is not, instead of trying to understand its true nature. If we could understand the true nature, if it's not good for you, from the outset, we would never want it in the first place. We would never develop a desire for it. So here's a story of how I'm sobered up somebody who was in dreamland. It was a devotee boy, and he was infatuated with a devotee girl. At least she was a devotee, right? And it was Los Angeles, Devi Bhava, long time ago, so long I can't remember when. And Amma noticed this boy, he was well known to her. He was gazing at this girl, lovesick. And Amma noticed that, so she called him to the stage. She smiled and looked at him and said, "Why were you looking at her so dreamily? Do you have a crush on her?" And the boy nodded his head, yeah. Amma laughed and asked again, "Does she know?" "No." "Have you ever talked with her?" "No." "Do you know anything about her personality?" "No." Amma started chuckling, and she said, "Even if you manage to get her as a girlfriend, she will eat you alive. She's that ferocious, okay?" Son, you are in your own dream world, which has no connection to reality. You are like a person dreaming in bed, but beware, while dreaming, you might fall off your bed and get a big shock when you hit the floor. After a lot of counseling from Amma, he realized his folly, and though it was probably difficult, he shifted his focus to Amma throughout the rest of the tour. And Amma tried so hard to pull him closer to her whenever possible, just to help him sober up. And we saw a real difference in that boy at the end of the tour. So again, we're so blessed to have her in our life. Now, on top of all that delusion that we were talking about, such demonic people, they make resolves. They take a vow, I'm going to do something really bad, impure and selfish vows. Like, I'm going to get that guy's money if it's the last thing I do. Or I'm going to destroy my competition, even if it means I destroy my own company. If I can't get it, they can't get it either. These kind of really nasty thoughts. The fact that they are deluded explains why they have such evil ideas. Because delusion creates fear and anger, and that leads us to doubt and criticize and hurt even those who are sincerely trying to help us. Sometimes someone just really wants to help us, but we suspect their intentions, and then later on we regret it. But this is what happens when a person cannot discern between right and wrong, between dharma and adharma. This is that magic that one of the boys in Amrita Puri talked about. And I really like that explanation. Yeah, Maya is just magic. It makes you lazy, unjust, and get everything backwards. You confuse dharma for adharma and vice versa. So once you have everything backwards, then you might do anything, even harmful things, to fulfill your desires. That's the problem. And it is our own demonic tendencies that make us want to take the easy path, the quick path to getting our desires. Even when it comes to pujas and homas, I'm sorry to say, some people say they really need a homa badly. So, but then when they find out how much is involved, like the preparations, the ceremony itself, the cleanup, they'll say like, can you shorten it? But I want the same outcome. I want the same benefit, but I want it to be just more simple. They'll probably find someone who will do it, but they're just being exploited. You know, homa is a homa, puja is a puja. You do it a certain way. There's not any real shortcut to it. Otherwise, you just sit in your puja room and cry tears to God. That is as powerful, if not more powerful, than any puja or homa. We have a couple of verses that go together next. I'll probably read them separately, but they are just one verse, truly. What we'll do is we'll read, I'll read the English in its entirety through both verses, and then we will chant we'll chant the Sanskrit separately, okay? Because you cut it off in the middle of a sentence, it doesn't really make sense. So we will begin with verse 11 and 12. Chintam aparimeyancha pralayantam upashritaha kamopabhoga parama etavad iti nischitaha. The rest of the Sanskrit we'll chant later, but I'll read the English straight through. Beset with innumerable cares, ending only at death, and with gratification of sensuous pleasures as their highest joy, they are convinced that this is all. Let me find the next verse. Sorry. Held hostage by 100 ties of expectations, given over to kama and anger, they strive to amass wealth by unjust means for sensuous pleasures. All right. So, what do the great souls have to say about these verses? Let's see their commentary. Shankaracharya says, their concerns are immeasurable, so they are always full of anxiety. Even still, they are convinced that the gratification of desires is the supreme goal of humanity. You would think after 50, 60, 70 years of trying the same thing, you would figure out, maybe I'm on the wrong track. No, they never realize that. They're like, maybe if I beat up this guy, I'll be happy. No, maybe if I abuse this person or do this, they try hard but fail because they have the wrong backward. They have everything backwards. And Sri Ramakrishna Deva, remember Vivekananda Swami's guru, says, materialists do not learn a lesson even when overcome with acute pain, disappointments, failures, and misfortunes in life. They are like the camels that continue chewing thorny shrubs, unmindful of the bleeding caused to their gums. A dearly loved wife dies or leaves. The man forgets about it and remarries. The sudden passing away of a beloved child brings desolation. But in a few days he brushes it aside and again absorbs himself in worldly life. The mother weeps and wails over the death of her baby. The next moment, she is busy arranging her jewels and costly clothing. The parents are driven to poverty due to the marriages of 2 or 3 daughters. Still, they continue to have children. In litigation, the property is drained away, yet on that same ground, even further litigation prevails. How strange. How strange indeed, but we need to examine and see what is my version of that. It seems crazy what he's talking about, but I have my own version of that. I have to figure out what that is. The tragedy of such a life is that even after making so much effort and acquiring so many things, wealth, houses, cars, public adulation, they still have no peace of mind. Why not? Because, first of all, they themselves are dishonest. They distrust and alienate everybody in their life. They're constantly afraid of being exposed or swindled. So they have to come up with new lies to cover up the old ones. With no one to trust, they lead a lonely life, ever brooding but never sleeping. They dig themselves so deep in their ways that they don't know how to get rid of it. But the biggest reason is that they unconsciously forfeited their freedom and empowered the world to determine their peace of mind. Like Amma says, we hand over the remote control of our mind to the world and to people. And then we criticize them for making us unhappy. Amma says, why did you give them the remote control in the first place? You know, and not only that, you know, you give him all these buttons, he can push on those buttons, and your anger button, your sadness button, and it's not his fault because you were the one who enabled him to do it. So this reminds me of a well-known quote from Viktor Frankl, who's a famous neurologist, psychiatrist, philosopher, author, and even a Holocaust survivor. He said, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." We know this teaching from Amma as happiness is a choice. But these demonic people don't feel that there is any choice. They don't have a choice to reduce their desires. They don't have a choice to get things legitimately. They think that this is the only way. And without a realization to change their mind, they will be certainly tormented by innumerable cares, ending only at death. Us too. To the extent that we cannot uproot those negative tendencies, we will also have lots of cares and will suffer at the time of death. And just like I showed in the examples before about the people, they resorted to bad habits as a way of making everything go away. It's a kind of escapism. Drinking, smoking, drugs, clubbing, all this stuff. Even though they had hundreds of millions of dollars or billions, they still had to do all these things to make all their fears and concerns go away temporarily. So what Jnanadev describes is none other than the Charvaka philosophy. The commentary describes, this is the same thing, Charvaka philosophy, hedonism. We're not saying hedonism judgmentally, like we're wonderful, we're pure, but it's a school of philosophy. It's like you can accept it or reject it, so we're rejecting it, that's the point. They view the body as the Atman. For them, that's all there is. So the body is the Atman. It's the only self there is. And then of the Purusharthas, the 4 goals of life, there's only one, which is self, which is sense gratification. And death is the only way we can get liberation, because there's nothing after that. So they have no rebirth, and so when the body dies, then that's the end forever. That's why the verse says, with gratification of sensuous pleasures as their highest joy, they are convinced that this is all. The only person in this whole world that can change them is Amma. So we just pray that they have the sense, or they get dragged to Amma like I was. So, verse 12, we haven't done the Sanskrit yet, we'll do that. And you'll see the English on the screen as well, and I'll give you the rendition that I have. I already read it out to you. So, the Sanskrit. Asha pasha shater baddhaha kama krodha parayanaha ihante kama bhoghartam anyayenartha sanchayan. Now, together, slowly. Asha pasha shatair baddhaha kama krodha parayanaha ihante kama bhogartham anyayenartha sanchayan. Only things that I changed were just the two. I changed it to by a, and the wrath I changed it to anger. I don't think anybody uses the word wrath much these days, not in the sense of anger. So Shankaracharya says, false hopes are the ties. So, see, there are hundreds of tires. What are those ties? Those ties are false hopes. It's not just like there's a possibility. No, you're not going to get it, and it's binding you anyhow. And he says they endeavor to obtain by unjust means, such as taking others' belongings, hoarding wealth for sensual enjoyment, not for dharma. Let's say you want to save up a lot of money just so you can build a hospital for the poor, like Amma has done. That's fine. That's dharmic. Jnanadev has some wonderful commentary here too. They meet the same fate by sticking fast to kama, to unbridled desire, like the fish that thoughtlessly swallows the bait with the hook hidden inside. Even if they fail in securing the desired gratification, they become like insects that go on spinning a cocoon around themselves, indulging in ever-increasing futile hopes. Their unfulfilled desires are converted into hatred. Their only goals remaining in life are kama, desire, and anger. With their kama unsatiated, their mountainously high expectations get dashed, converting into the form of anger. In spite of all this, their fancy for anger and hatred knows no bounds. So they suffer this much so long, and they still don't relinquish their hatred, their anger. To gratify their desires without wealth, they scramble helter-skelter in the world to acquire wealth, to gratify their passions. They hatch plots, kill one, rob another, and torture a third. Just as hunters go out, armed with snares, nets, dogs, falcons, and spears, devouring whatever animals they kill, demonic people commit evil acts. So they are hunting down the pure-hearted people, the innocent people, the undoubting people. And Sri Ramakrishna says, people are of two kinds. Those of a strictly worldly temperament are base and unrefined. Desire and greed govern them. But more refined people strive for spiritual excellence. So I think we can just slightly, we're in that direction towards spiritual growth, we'll say, not excellence. And a more recent commentary says, those of a demonic nature make life complicated by cruel competition. Frenzy, falsehood, and fraud are the norm for them. They amass wealth ravenously for luxurious sense indulgence. So in English, we only have one word for expectation, and that's expectation. But in Sanskrit, there's two words, and we can, when we learn the meaning of those, we can understand which one they're talking about here. So there's something called pratiksha, which is also there in Malayalam, and asha. It's also there in Malayalam. So pratiksha means an expectation about something that can actually be attained. Like you call somebody and you say, I expect to be at your house by around 8 p.m. So maybe a little bit earlier or later, but it's possible to get there. Asha is a more subtle expectation that forms in our mind through daydreaming and fantasizing, like winning the lottery or like staring at the apple of your eye even though you've never talked with her before. It's just a wild hope. Actually, somebody came to Amma during darshan in Japan, and I think it was 2003 or 2004. And it was a kind of an elderly woman, and she was in the question line. I happened to be translating, and she said, Amma said, what's her question? And she told me, and then I told Amma, and her question was this: Amma, I'm having some financial problems, so I'm going to buy a lottery ticket, and I just want you to tell which store to buy it from, what day and what time. That's all I want to know. Amma just laughed so hard. If it was that easy, Amma's, all of Amma's devotees would be living in rich, huge mansions, right? Amma said, she laughed, and when she was done laughing, she says, my darling daughter, can you please ask a spiritual question? I can answer a spiritual question. And the woman was startled, like, you mean you're not going to let me ask this question? I don't even remember what she said after that. I think she was too confused to even ask anything. But I felt sorry for her. She's not a bad person, but that was just a funny question. Now, going back to the demonic people, that demonic nature makes them have like countless wild hopes, and they're constantly daydreaming about what they're going to get or what they want to get. They have no focus, no concentration, and no beneficial efforts. They're just scheming and plotting and daydreaming. They can't even appreciate simple pleasures because their mind is preoccupied with their castles in the sky. Sometimes just, here in the ashram in Chicago, we love the sunrise and sunset every day. You may have a nice garden, your gardening, your vegetables. These things give simple pleasures. They can't enjoy those at all because they're thinking of something, much bigger, and they're going to get it even if it means they have to hurt somebody. So they're plotting how to do that. So their sadhana, if you can call it that, is anger and desire. Desire and anger. They have a mantra which is money, money, money. Desire, desire, desire. That's their mantra. So they have their sadhanas, but they don't get them anywhere. They lead only to suffering. But you have to feel sorry for them because they don't know anything else. Their mind has made them believe this. So creating a desire is actually very easy. We do it all the time. It's effortless and instantaneous. But the hard part is fulfilling the desire, which is next to impossible. There's something that I noticed in Japan about these bullet trains. It's really kind of a ironic commentary on, today's world. These bullet trains, we call them Shinkansen. When they first released them. They called like the first series, I forgot the number, but they had first series, second series, third series. And the first series was obviously not the fastest. It's now the slowest one. But they gave it a really snazzy name, which was Kodama, which means echo. Like, you say, hello, and then your voice comes back to you just in a split second, right? It's the sound, it's the speed of sound. So it's not going the speed of sounds, but just calling it Kodama or echo makes you feel like it's going really fast. And then they came up with a new series, and they're like, what's faster than the speed of sound? Speed of light. So they called it Hikari, which means light. And everybody's like, wow, I'm going really fast. I'm on the Hikari bullet train. But then a third generation came, and they were lost. They were at a loss for a word. What are we going to call it? We already have light, Hikari. What's faster than that? Some very clever person came up with the name, and they named it Nozomi, which means, amongst other things, desire. So even faster than light, the desires are running forward around the whole universe. And another ironic thing I found, because I've been on the bullet train many times, when you get off, before you get off, every time, especially on the terminus, the last stop, they make a long announcement. Don't leave your cell phone and umbrellas in the train. We have so many of these things here, in a more polite way. They say, we have a problem, so many phones and umbrellas have been left behind. And so what that tells us is that even though they're on the fastest train in the world, or was fastest train in the world, the mind's already reaching there and thinking about something else. And that's why you forget your phone or your umbrella, because you're not in the present moment. The mind has already gone somewhere else. So the mind reaches the destination before the train does. Crazy. The problem is that in the process of pursuing one desire, 10 more or 100 more desires are created in the process, in the mind. So while removing the desire is not so easy, it is still way easier than pursuing it endlessly and fruitlessly. And Jnanadev concludes this verse with his commentary. Now hear how their minds are delighted with the riches acquired by them by destroying the lives of numerous creatures. Kind of a scary proposal, but we're going to hear about that next week. For the conclusion of today's class, we have one question that has come. We're finally getting a few questions. They're resuming after my fault for being out of commission or being out of the country, not teaching the Gita class for 4 months, so there's finally one question. Good one though. So, I'll tell you when I have a slide, but I'm not going to show it right now. The question is, where are negative qualities, vasanas, and karmas stored? Scriptures say that we have 5 bodies, sheaths, or koshas. Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya, and so on. I'll explain what that is. Scriptures also say that we have a physical, astral, and causal body. Can you explain which koshas, kosha means like sheath, which koshas classify under astral and causal and why? Also, in which koshas or subtle bodies are negativities, karmas, and vasanas stored? All right, this person sounds like he or she is going to attack the place. He wants to know where the cell is so he can really rough them up good and show them who's boss. All right, so now we're going to have a slide, and I just made this today to make it a little easier to understand. Go ahead. Okay, so Jivatma is the word in Sanskrit for the individual soul. You have probably heard of Paramatma, the Supreme Soul. That is Amma for us. And just like we want to merge in Amma, the classical concept would merge in the Paramatma. But Jivatma means that it is like us. We are in reality the Supreme Being. We are the true self, but we feel separate, so that Jiva is like the individual soul. So we forgot who we are, so we're the Jivatman. We're not the pure Atman. We have this sense of individuality that prevents us from merging in Amma. So that's why I'm starting with Jivatma. And it has three primary categories. It's Sanskrit, don't worry, the English will come. Stula Sharira. You really should learn how to read these diacritical marks. It's the only way to pronounce it properly. See, the U has a long line on top of it. That means it's elongated. It's an elongated vowel. English is horribly handicapped in expressing all these sounds, so we have to come up with little tricks like this. S with a slash on top is sha, not sa, or sha, like that. So like that, we pronounce it stula sharira. And then in the middle we have sukshma sharira. The last one is karana sharira. Okay, what in the world do these mean? Let's see the next one. Next. No, you have to click. Oh, you just click one more time. No, you have to just hit the go back. Yeah, sorry. Okay, that's all. That's all you have to show. You went too far. Sorry. Yeah, you go one at a time. Yeah, that's good enough. Just telling my trusty helper here. So stula sharira means the physical body, as you can see. It's also known as the Annamaya Kosha. So Annamaya, Anna means food. So it just means the body that is made out of food. That's this physical body, right? And what does that mean? Well, just like food and everything in nature is made up of the 5 elements, this body is also made up of the 5 elements. And if it weren't the present day, if it were a few thousand years ago, we would just be devoured. The body would be devoured by, all kinds of worms, and would be returned to the earth. Like the elements came from the earth and go back to the earth. So what we call death is simply the end of this body. That is what our amateur vision tells us. Now, forward just one tap. There we go. So this is the causal body. I'm getting to the sukshma last. Causal body is the karana sharira. It is also known as the Anandamaya Kosha because it is pure bliss. Why is it pure bliss? How do we know it's pure bliss? Because the only indirect experience we have of it is when we wake up from deep sleep, dreamless sleep. We feel so blissful. And, when you wake up, you say, oh, I was out like a rock. I don't remember anything. I was so deep sleep. And it feels so good. They're saying that not because it felt bad, they're saying because it felt really good. Because that's when we were immersed in our true being without any ego, without a mind, without an intellect, nothing. We were just in pure bliss. The problem was we weren't aware of it. It's a big problem. But it also represents our ignorance, meaning the ignorance of our true self. And that's what's preventing us from consciously experiencing that bliss. It's also the root cause of duality, or the feeling of duality, which we call Dvaita Bhava, or Bheda Bhava. So if we didn't have that ignorance, we wouldn't feel that we're separate from God or from Amma. And it is the storehouse of our karma from past lives. So it is the cause of our birth. That's the point. It's causal in that sense. If we didn't have that causal body, we would be merged in Brahman or Amma or whatever it is, Paramatman. And then there's no more karma, so we don't have to worry about causal anything. There's no cause and effect anymore for such a person. The next one is the all-important, is the last one also, the Sukshma Sharira. This is the subtle body. It is similar to, but different from the term astral body. So don't get those confused, because a lot of people do. Astral body is something that came from Western philosophy, or obviously Greek philosophy being the oldest one. And they're not an exact replica of each other, so let's drop that word astral if you don't mind. It's just a source of a lot of confusion. What in this Sanatana Dharma, in Vedanta and virtually every school of philosophy in India, subtle body represents the amalgamation of pranamaya, manomaya, and vijnanamaya koshas. Now, it's not, you don't have to remember all these names, that's not important, because you put those three together and it's the subtle body. So you can just say subtle body or sukshma sharira. But if you want to get to a little more technical, you know, one part of that subtle body is the energies that flow through our body, primarily 5. And are they healthy? Are they unhealthy? This is the subject of Ayurvedic research and treatment. Manomaya kosha is the mental level. So you look at the mind and the emotions, that part of the subtle body. And then also the intellect has a role in the subtle body as well. It's not the physical body, that's for sure. And it's not the source of our ignorance. It's not the cause of our ignorance. So we use that as part of our subtle body. And in this subtle body, according to Amma, all the vasanas and past mental impressions reside during life. Okay? So when we react to something, and there's the impressions in our subtle mind, our subtle body, are what lead us to react and act in certain ways. And it's not the unconscious. The unconscious or the subconscious is the causal body. It's something that is way beyond our access. But the subtle body is something that we can actually grasp, at least through our own meditations and maybe therapy or something like that, psychology. They can get at deep impressions within you, and that make us do things even though we don't want to, perhaps. So that's the place where the vasanas exist. So, and it's also, the last point there is, after the fall of the body, it is this subtle body that ultimately takes another body. The physical body is gone, so it needs a new physical body, and the ignorance, the cause of our reincarnation is always the same. There's nothing to say about that. So it's about the subtle body entering into another physical body. So this is a simple explanation. There's a lot more to talk about these things, but that wasn't the question, and we don't have time anyhow. So we will conclude today, and we'll resume where we left off on next Thursday. And for all those who are not aware, in the United States, we are coming out of our previous system of not having any in-person satsangs. We are gradually, depending on the region, opening up our satsangs again. And for example, this Saturday here in Chicago, We will allow people to participate in person if they follow the rules and guidelines, which you can find on our website. And there's no problem actually calling in advance to just let us know that you're coming, so we can keep track of the numbers, make sure we have enough chairs and evenly distributed. So the flip side of that is that we're not going to have any more live streams on Saturday. And these scriptural classes, we know they're going to go to the end of this month, but we're not quite sure what's going to happen after that. Please stay tuned, and we'll try to accommodate everybody in some way or another. Namah Shivaya. And we will conclude with the first two concluding mantras, after which we will meditate for some time. You can join us if you wish. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Let us take this opportunity to meditate together, virtually though it may be. Close your eyes, please. Check your posture. And take a few long, deep breaths. Feel the mind and body relax further and further with each and every long, deep inhalation and exhalation. Try to feel Amma's subtle presence all around you. Feel her arms around you. Embraced in her universal hug and permeated by her love as well. as the mind calms down and becomes peaceful, it is easier for us to visualize. Take a moment to remember your day or the past few days, and try to remember an unpleasant circumstance when you felt somebody mistreated you or was unkind or something of that sort. In our mind's eye, we can see perhaps their angry face, their harsh words, their cruel behavior, or something somebody wrote to you and you couldn't sleep that night because of it. Though they might not be so terrible, such actions are the same demonic nature that we're talking about in this chapter. Now take a moment to introspect the last time you did the same thing to somebody else. Nobody likes being shouted at, but we still do it. We distrust others even though we want to be trusted. Let's take a moment to look within and identify such a case so we can again surrender it at Amma's feet. Let us send loving vibrations to whomever might have been the victim of our negativities. It might even be Mother Nature or all beings. Let us feel compassion for them and wholeheartedly offer our that very negativity at Amma's feet, praying, Amma, only you can remove, completely uproot these deep-seated tendencies. I'm trying. Sometimes I feel it's impossible. I need your help. I need to know that you're with me all the time, helping me each step of the way. Now let us conclude with the final mantra, final prayer. Take a long deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudacchate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes if you wish. Om Namah Shivaya. We'll see you on Thursday.